you guys remember how task 3 worked? What you needed to do for that question? So it's basically, it's an integrated question, which means that you first have to read a text. Now, what you're going to read is going to be an academic text, right? It's a text explaining a certain concept in one academic subject. So it could be psychology, biology, business, or maybe something else. And what you needed to do when you're reading was identify the definition of the concept, right? Obviously, the title, the concept, and its definition. And then you'll have to listen to this lecture where the professor gives you some examples of the concept, right? So you listen to the lecture, you hear the examples, and finally you just have to use those examples to explain the concept. So kind of put everything together. This was the template. So if you guys don't have it, please take a screenshot of the template. Because I'm gonna need you guys to use it today. Please make sure that you have it ready. Okay, are we done? Okay, that's great. And we're gonna start practicing. Okay, so let's take a look. Okay, guys, we're gonna start with this one. Does anyone remember how many seconds we had to read the article?
60.
To read?
45.
45 to read, 60 to speak. 30 seconds to prepare. So let's start with this question here, comfort zone bias. You guys will have 45 seconds to read the text starting now.
Psychology have found that when people make important decisions, they often choose to stay in their comfort zone.
Now listen to part of a lecture in a psychology class. Okay, so this comes up a lot when people make career decisions. A friend of mine from college always wanted to be a film reviewer. He was a film major and he loved movies. Most of all, he loved to write about movies. So when he graduated, he looked for a job as a film reviewer for a newspaper because, as a film reviewer, he'd get to see films for free and would be paid to write about them. That's what he loved. But he couldn't find a job as a film reviewer. So he took a position as a news reporter instead for a newspaper, investigating stories, writing about events, what news reporters do. Now, at first, my friend wasn't sure he'd be any good at this. He'd never been a news reporter before. But eventually, he adjusted and gained confidence, and he got used to the job. And he realized he was actually a pretty good reporter. Anyway, here's the thing. After a few years, the film reviewer for the newspaper where he worked quit, and my friend was offered her job. This was his dream, right? His opportunity to be a film reviewer had finally come, and the new job would actually pay more, too. But did he take the job? Nope, he turned it down. He told me he'd gotten used to being a news reporter, and he just didn't want to try something else. It seemed like too big of a change since, well, there was a chance that the new job might not work out.
Now, using the example from the lecture, explain the comfort zone bias. Now you'll have 30 seconds to prepare your responses. Okay. So, who wants to go first?
Me. Okay. According to the passage, comfort zone bias occurs when people remain in comfortable zones instead trying new things. In the lecture, the professor gave the example of his friend's jobs. He explains that his friend got a job like as a newspaper reporter. He had the opportunity of take a new job in as a writing film renew, and he didn't take them because he was comfortable with the position he already had.
Okay, all right, hold on. So I really like your introduction. You had the correct definition. So the pandemic remain in your comfort zone, right? In comfortable situations instead of entering new ones. Now, your example was also really good, and I like how you summarized it because you went directly for the main idea, which is how he rejected or turned down this offer because he was experiencing this tendency, right? But maybe you skipped some important details from the example that were necessary to understand better the idea, like mentioning that his dream job was to work for as a film reviewer, right? That's what he actually studied for, and that's what he liked. He liked to write about movies. So initially he took it because he didn't find the job that he wanted. And when he got the chance to have that job that he had always dreamed of, he turned it down, right? Because of this. And maybe that detail. But aside from that, it was a great response. Maybe save some time in the beginning so you have the time to add those details. And one only detail for grammar. Remember that after any type of preposition like of, about, you have to use a gerund, right? So of taking instead of take. That'd be the only thing. Well done. You guys, any questions so far? Okay, let's do another one. It'll be the same. You have 45 seconds to read the text.
Now listen to part of a lecture on this topic in a psychology class. For example, I recently read about a case in which a researcher was given two groups of monkeys, and he was asked to train these monkeys to pick up a ball and put it in a box. And he was told to record how many hours it took to train each monkey to learn to do this. Now, before he started the training, the researcher was told that one group of monkeys was highly intelligent and that the other group was less intelligent. In truth, there was no difference between them. All the monkeys were actually very similar in terms of intelligence, but the researcher didn't know that. He thought one group was smarter, so he expected that that group would be easier to train. So, what happened? Well, the researcher trained the monkeys to perform the action, and it turned out that, on average, it took him 2 hours less time to train the supposedly smart monkeys than the supposedly less intelligent monkeys. Why? Well, it turns out that with the supposedly smart monkeys, the researcher smiled at them a lot, gave them a lot of encouragement, talked to them a lot, worked hard to communicate with them. But with the monkeys he thought were less intelligent, he wasn't as enthusiastic. He didn't try quite as hard, wasn't quite as optimistic.
Now, explain how the example from the professor's lecture illustrates the experiment effect. Now you'll have 30 seconds to prepare your responses. Okay, so anyone that wants to go next?
Me, teacher?
Of course, there you go, go ahead.
Okay. According to the passage, experiment effect occurs when researchers' expectations affect the outcome of the experiment. In the lecture, the professor gives the example of two groups of monkeys. And in this experiment, they say to a professor that he has to teach these groups of monkeys to pick a ball and put it into a box. And the researchers said to him that one group was highly intelligent and the other group was less intelligent. And for this reason, this professor has do it in less time with the first group than the second group, because he was more enthusiastic with the first group than the second.
Okay, all right. You needed some more time, right?
Yes, I took a lot of time in the middle of the speaking.
Okay. It was good though. I mean, you had a great introduction, the correct definition. Love the way you summarize it. And the researcher's expectations affect the outcome of the experiment. Focus on that information when it comes to the example as well, right? Maybe you gave too many details, like explaining what tasks the monkeys were or needed to be trained on doing, like picking a ball, putting it into a box. Too many details, right? Explain right off. So there was an experiment with two groups of monkeys, and the researcher was supposed to train these monkeys. Now, he was told that one group was more intelligent than the other, and as a result, he dedicated more time, he put more effort into training that group. So his expectations of that group learning faster affected the outcome of the experiment, because at the end of the day, that group ended up learning faster than the other, right?
Yes.
So focus always on what matters the most to the definition, without giving too many details.
Okay, thank you, teacher.
Any questions so far? Okay, as you can see, now we've seen the three types of examples that we have with psychology, right? Remember I was telling you on Thursday's class, when you have psychology, you can either have a story from the professor's own experience, or a friend of his, somebody that he knows, or she knows, if it's a female professor, like the one we did before, right, about comfort zone bias. So it was a story. In that case, you just have the sequence of events. It's a perfect opportunity for you to use different transitions, right? Like first, initially, afterwards, therefore, I don't know, finally. Same, the second type of example that you have for psychology is experiments. And this was an example of that. So in this case, you have to have the appropriate vocabulary, right? Like researchers, experiment, subject or object groups. I don't know. So that vocabulary can be helpful. And when you have experiments, always try to focus on explaining the results of the experiment, because the results of the experiment is what proves the concept, right? Same thing as in this case. The result of the experiment, the fact that one group learned faster than the other because of what the researcher was expecting, is what proves the experiment effect, right? So always focus on the result of the experiment. So yes, those are the three types of examples you can have with psychology. The third one was the one we did on Thursday's class, right? About a group of people, like kids, and how they change their behavior in class. So any questions so far? Okay. Then let's do something else. Let's do something different. Let's do this one here, which is art, something new. So we'll have 45 seconds to read the text.
Now listen to part of a lecture in an art history class.
All right, so let's consider the work of the outsider artist Henry Darger. Darger lived by himself in a tiny apartment in Chicago in the 1900s. He had no friends and spent all his spare time there alone, creating hundreds of paintings and drawings. He had never formally studied art and kept his work completely private, so no one ever saw it or responded to it during his lifetime. And so when you see Darger's work, you notice how unique it is. It doesn't remind you of anything you've ever seen before. It's very much his own. For example, one piece, it's a watercolor painting. In this piece, he illustrates a story about the adventures of 7 children. But see, Darger had a really hard time drawing human figures, yet he managed to come up with his own rather unique solution for the problem. He simply cut out pictures of children from newspapers and magazines and pasted them into his own painted illustration of trees, flowers, and grass. The results look a little strange. Darger's picture looks more cluttered, more crowded with details than the pictures of other artists, because its entire surface is painted and there are no spaces left empty. It's also a lot longer than the pictures of most other artists, about 9 feet long.
Now explain why Henry Darger is considered as an outsider artist. You will now have 30 seconds to prepare your responses. Okay. So anyone else that wants to try? Maybe Alejandra?
Okay.
Go ahead, please.
According to the passage, outsider art describes a kind of art that is made by people who choose to live and work outside society. In the lecture, the professor gives the example of Henry Dyer, who was an outsider artist. He explains that Henry Dyer, who lived in Chicago, his work was really private and unique. And he made like around 100 paintings. And technically, he explains that his work illustrates a history. His work was a really unique solution that there was a lot of details. It was really crowded with details and really longer. It was really longer than the other kind of paintings.
Okay, all right. Good, well done. So you had a good definition. Outsider artist is somebody that lives, or outsider artists are that's somebody that lives outside of society and that has no training. Now, in your example, I mean, you did mention that Henry Darger's art was very unique, it was different. And then you mentioned a couple of details, right? Like he made over 100 paintings, he lived in Chicago, but try to always approach it from the way that would explain why he's an outsider artist, right? Something that's related to what you had in the reading. So for example, if you say that he lived in Chicago, then probably would be better to mention, it's okay to mention that he lived in Chicago, but completely alone, outside of society, far away from town. So he had no contact with the people from Chicago. That would be even more important than mentioning that he lived there, right? Same thing for us, how many paintings he had. Maybe that's not too important, but it would be important to mention maybe that he had no formal training, right? So his paintings were different than from other artists. And you can maybe give the examples of this painting that they mentioned of how he cut figures from a magazine and he pasted them in his canvas. So try to always focus on what is mentioned in the reading, right? Using that example. So is it okay? Other than that, I wouldn't say anything else. Everything was really good, and I love your delivery person. So you speak very calmly, at a good pace. So that's really awesome. Yeah. So that was art. Something not too common, but that could appear. Let's do something else. Okay, let's now do biology. So you will have 45 seconds to read the text.
Now listen to a lecture on this topic in a biology class.
Okay, we can see a great example of this with ants. Ants live in large groups called colonies. They normally move together to get to food sources. And sometimes when ants are moving toward a food source, they'll encounter or find an obstacle in their path. So, for instance, let's say a large number of ants are walking on a tree toward some food on a branch. But when they reach the end of the branch they're walking on, there's a wide space between that branch and the next one, the branch with the food on it. Now, none of these ants alone can cross this wide space to get to the other branch with the food. So, how do they solve this problem? Here's how. One ant walks forward until it reaches the end of the branch, and then it automatically holds on to the branch with its back legs. Then it stretches its body forward into the open space. Now, this comes naturally to ants, and it's a simple action. So then the next ant walks to the end of the branch and right across the first ant's body. Then it holds on to the first ant, and then it stretches its body out into the open space, just a little bit closer to the branch with the food on it. Then, one after another, other ants do the same thing, until enough ants connect together to form a bridge between the two branches. Pretty amazing, huh? The connected ants hold this position, allowing the rest of the ants in the group to cross over this bridge of ants to reach the food.
Now, explain how the example from the lecture illustrates the concept of swarm intelligence. Now you'll have 30 seconds to prepare your responses. Okay. So, Marco, maybe please.
Okay,
Okay, go ahead.
according to the passage, swarm intelligence is a complex behavior that is that insects typically accomplish when they need something to accomplish some complex task. In the lecture, the professor gives example of ants. They live in large colonies, and when they need to find food, for example, and there's a space between two branches, they start like a bridge between the branches using their own bodies. And this helps them to get to the food they are looking for.
Okay, all right, well done, Marco. Your summary of the example was really good, but you did spend too much time in the introduction.
Yeah.
So make sure that you always have that ready. Copy and paste what you have from the text. It's usually in the beginning. So, well, in this case, it was almost in the middle, right? It's a complex group behavior that is accomplished by insects as a group, right? So just make sure that you have it ready for your introduction, and it'll be great.
Okay.
Right. Or do another one. Let's do business. All right. So it'll be the same. You guys will have 45 seconds to read the text.
Now listen to part of a lecture in a marketing class.
You know, there are lots of different companies out there that make and sell cookies or biscuits, but there's one company, Big Bear Cookies, that has used this technique to sell more cookies than all its competitors. How? Well, the company has this animal character called Big Bear that it uses in all of its advertising. The picture of the bear is on its cookie boxes, and the character of the bear also appears in its TV commercials. Oh, and of course, the cookies themselves are shaped like Big Bear. Now, most people who eat Big Bear cookies are children, and, well, they enjoy the bear and think that he's really entertaining and fun. In the TV commercials, for example, he's always saying funny things and dancing around in a lively, comical way. So, Big Bear makes children feel good about the company's cookies, makes children want to get them. And, you know, the really interesting thing is that the figure of Big Bear stays in people's minds and makes them think of cookies, even though bears don't usually have anything to do with cookies. I mean, bears certainly don't make or eat cookies, right? Yet, Big Bear is a character that people, particularly children, don't seem to forget, because year after year, Big Bear Cookies sells more cookies than any other company.
Okay. Now, using the example from the lecture, explain the use of image advertising to sell products. You'll now have 30 seconds to prepare your responses. Okay. So, Tatiana, please. And then you'll go, Rafael. So, go
Okay. Image advertisement is defined as any visual figure or representation that will link the company product in the consumer's mind. The professor gives the example of Big Bear Cookies, which is a company that sells cookies using this hack that is stay in people's mind using their name and also the animal, which is a bear, in a commercial that makes kids feels good and remember this character.
Okay, okay, on. Perfect. So nice. I mean, everything was great. The way you explained the example, your definition was also good. So in some cases, like for example, in this one, maybe we could also even skip the definition, right? Because I think it's almost self-explanatory, but it was still okay. You know, of course, we have a template, we have a structure to follow, but if you think that something can be done in a better way, then you can also do it, right? Maybe in this case, you could just say, um, according to the text or in the text, they talk about image advertising, which is illustrated in the lecture with the example of Big Bear company. I don't know. So depending on the context, right? But it was really well done, Tatiana. Thanks. Guys, so let's do another one. So this one here. Not that one. Okay, here. Same thing, you guys will have 45 seconds to read the text.
Now listen to part of a lecture on this topic in a psychology class.
Let's take an everyday example. An ordinary round plate like you'd find in a kitchen. If you hold the plate directly in front of your face and look at it, what shape do you see? A perfect circle, right? Suppose you tilt the plate to a different angle, to a horizontal position, like you're planning to put food on it. Still a perfect circle? No. The circle is now stretched out, flattened into an oval. Do you conclude the plate has actually changed shape? Or that it's a different object, not the same plate? Of course not. It looks different, but we perceive it as still being the same. Here's a different example. This classroom we're in, it's fairly large, right? Now, from up close, from the front row, I appear to be relatively big. Bigger than if you were in the last row, right? But let's say you're sitting in the front row today, but tomorrow you're sitting in the back row. From back there, I'm going to look smaller, but you don't think I've actually gotten smaller. You don't think you're seeing a different professor, a guy who looks like me except he's smaller. No matter where you are, up close or far away, you understand without even thinking about it that I'm the same size, the same person.
Now listen to part of a lecture on this topic in a psychology class.
Sorry, guys. Okay, now the question says, explain what is meant by perceptual constancy using the examples provided by the professor. Now, you guys will have 30 seconds to prepare your responses. Okay, so Rafael, please, you can start speaking.
I didn't quite understand this one. I was kind of, I didn't quite understand this one. Can I do the next one, please?
Okay, good. You can do the next one, but it's always a good idea to practice improvising, even if you didn't understand some parts, because that can happen in the actual test, and it's better to have an idea of what things you could do, But okay, for this time you're gonna go in the next one. So in that case, maybe Erica.
Yes.
Go ahead, please.
Okay, perceptual constancy basically means that no matter if the conditions could change or the objects could seem be like different, the people have the ability to still recognize them. So to point out, to illustrate this, the professor says that how about being in the kitchen and have a plate, so they are gonna watch like a perfect circle, and if they put a food, maybe the shape of this plate could seem like an oval, but it's a same plate. And additionally, when he's in the classroom, maybe somebody that is sitting in front could seem he is big, and in the back maybe he be like so like little, but it's not.
He is right instead of he be. Okay, well done. So you had the two examples. You had the correct definition. So no matter, I mean, it doesn't matter if you see an object from different angles and if you see it in different shapes, you understand and you recognize the object. And both examples were also good. So I don't think I have any comments. Well done. Remember, we don't say the people, but only people, right? So people will recognize the object.
Yeah.
Okay. So let's do another one. Okay, here. So it's the same. You guys will have 45 seconds to read the text.
Now listen to part of a lecture on this topic in an environmental science class.
So, one example of this is the macaw, the great green macaw. Now, the great green macaw is a beautiful bird, a fairly large-sized parrot known for its colorful feathers, gorgeous green feathers with some red and blue feathers too. The macaw lives in the South American rainforest, in a part of the rainforest where a lot of trees had been cut down, trees that the macaw relies on for its food and nesting. So, the macaw was in trouble. And, of course, along with the trees, a lot of other animals were in trouble too. Lots of birds, bats, and frogs also lived in these trees. So, when the trees were cut down and cleared away, these animals also didn't have a place to live anymore, and their populations drastically declined. So, what a concerned group of people in the area did was they started spreading the word about how the macaw, this really beautiful bird, needed help. They made little books with information about the macaw, with pictures, full-colored pictures of the macaw that showed off its beautiful feathers. And they passed out these little books, these informational brochures. They distributed them to people in schools and community centers in the area. And a lot of people responded. They contributed money and helped the group set up some protected land, a special area where no one could cut down the trees, so the macaw would be safe. And the macaw's population started to increase, and other birds and bats and frogs came back to the area too. Their numbers increased along with the trees.
Now, using the example of the macaw from the lecture, explain the concept of flagship city. Now you guys will have 30 seconds to prepare your responses. And yes, Rafael, you will. Okay, so Rafael, case you can start now.
Okay, so according to the passage, flagship species, this occurs when the particular species to represent the threatened habitat of a general public is in risk. And in the lecture, the man gives us the example of a great green maca, that is a great bird, green and that has green and blue feathers. And well, he explains that these birds lived in trees, and they were in trouble, as well as other animals that live in trees, because they didn't have anywhere to live anymore because of the destruction of these trees. And um and as a summary of and a sample of this topic, we can say that these birds and other animals needed help, and they distributed a help that could give money to stop the destruction of trees and animals and help these birds.
Okay, great. So yes, so they used the macaw to raise awareness, right? They used the image of the macaw to represent the entire habitat, the entire range of species that live in that habitat. I need to say that. Okay, good, well done. So I honestly don't have any comments. It was a good definition. You summarized the example well, although maybe you had some unnecessary details. Maybe what I would suggest is that you study some vocabulary, right, related to environment and biology. So things like, for example, deforestation instead of the destruction of trees, right, or extinction of animals, or animals in danger of extinction, right, or endangered species. I don't know, that type of vocabulary is always helpful when it comes to the TOEFL test. So make sure that you study some.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Do you guys have any questions so far? Okay. Then let's do another one. This one here, cultural lack. Let's see what it's about. You guys will have 45 seconds to read the text.
Now listen to part of a lecture from a sociology class.
Now, the invention of the telephone was revolutionary. It was a much easier and faster way of communicating than anything else available at the time. However, when the telephone first became widely available towards the end of the 19th century, only businesses used telephones because businesses realized how the telephone could benefit them, how it could help them be more productive. But a lot of people in the general public didn't think the phone should be used for personal communication. Some people didn't like to listen to someone's voice without being able to see them. Also, a lot of people thought that it was rude to call someone on the telephone instead of visiting them in person. They missed the sense of personal connection they got from meeting someone. However, as we all know, people gradually changed their minds about the telephone. It took about 30 years, but eventually most homes came to have telephones, and everyone came to depend on them. Talking to someone you couldn't see began to seem more and more normal. Friends began to call each other just to chat, just for fun. And after everyone agreed on certain rules of politeness, such as not calling someone late at night, no one considered it rude anymore to make personal phone calls.
Now, using the example of the telephone, explain the concept of cultural lack. You'll now have 30 seconds to prepare your responses. Okay. So, who wants to go?
And me.
Great, Sophia, so please go ahead.
According to the passage, culture lag is defined as the period of transition to adjust to technology change. In the lecture, the professor gave the example of the telephone. He explains that first people were used to use the telephone and they think they were rude because they couldn't see the person and maybe it can bother them to call them always. But later, after 30 years, people get used to it and start having phones in their house. Starting call each other just to chat, even if they couldn't see each other. After some rules, well, I finished.
Okay, yeah, great. So, as I was hearing your response, so it was good. I mean, in terms of the content, you did have the correct definition, the period of transition when people are adjusting to a technological change, and you had a good way of summarizing the example as well. So you made that comparison of how people didn't like or didn't, yeah, they weren't used to the telephone, so they didn't take it well, and how now it's just a common thing. It was good. Now, one thing I noticed is that maybe something that made you struggle was your notes, right? Because you were looking at your notes, reading word by word, and you were having problems connecting the ideas. And also you were like turning pages. So careful with the way that you're organizing your notes. Maybe if I were you, I'd honestly try answering this question without taking notes for one time, or just taking a few notes, because I think you can do it, and maybe you will have more fluency in expressing the ideas. Right, so I would try that, and also careful with grammar with your texts, right? In this case, we had past examples, how people used the telephone in the past and how they got used to it throughout time. So careful with the texts.
Okay.
Okay, guys. So what do you think? Does anybody have any question about this question of the speaking section? I think you guys are doing really great, all of you. But I don't know if maybe you have some questions. Is everything clear? Questions? Okay, guys, then in that case, please don't forget today's survey. And I'll be seeing you all tomorrow in class.
Bye, Miss. Thank you.
Bye, guys.
Bye. Thank
Bye,
you.
Andrea. Bye, guys.
Andrea,
Yes.
we have a call meeting right now. I don't know if I didn't receive the link like last time, so
Same as usual. It's always the same thing.
okay. So
I'll
I'm
see
going there.